Hey there, Simone here with Bulletproof Business Growth, as always with some ideas and insights what to pay attention to when you're growing and scaling your business. So today we're going to talk about some red flags that identify bad leaders. Why do you want to know that? Because valuing your team as a leader, of course, is massively important if you want them to show up for you. And we're going to talk about how avoid these pitfalls that absolutely undermine your effectiveness as a leader. So, truly great leaders, they recognize that being a leader is hard work. It doesn't come by itself. It also is something that you have to put time and effort into. And when you think about it, it really means that you have to put constant recognition towards it, constant effort towards it, because that is really what your self-improvement as a leader demands. So for most, it falls short because, you think you don't have the time and there are so many other things always to do. And they don't really recognize what a hugely important part of their role it is to develop their people. Because a lot of times, when you're just faced with how difficult it is to get people to do, which they would ordinarily not, as Norman Schwarzkopf said, it kind of feels like you have all these different pieces that are not working together, so they're kind of treating their team as cogs in a machine versus they're caring about their well-being and success, which is what people truly need to show up for you. And that means they're struggling with a disengaged, unhappy teams that do the opposite. They don't show up, and oftentimes at the worst possible moments. So you have, as a leader, it is absolutely crucial that you have to give direction, appreciation, and recognition to your most valuable assets, your people, or it really wears people down. You've heard this saying many times before: people don't leave companies, they leave leaders. And it's absolutely true. And look, when we're looking at what's changed in the last few years, that's one of the things that, it used to be kind of a nice to have, and those were exceptional companies that cared about this, and it was something that was more, in a bigger company, and small companies didn't usually pay attention to this. But in today's environment, it is absolutely essential to pay attention to everything we're talking about, right? Because how do you know about this? When you're missing the mark, it means that you give this message that means I don't value you, and it also means you give this message that profit is more important than people. And of course, if you are an employee, that's the last thing you want to feel when you work for somebody. So I'm going to talk about the 12 most common signs. And I really invite you to be honest with yourself here, because you want to find out where you can really truly build yourself, and it's not as hard as you think. So really pay attention to what sounds familiar here so that you can do something about it, right? So the first thing is when you have lack of direction, when you feel like you're refusing to plan, and especially when you're not finding that you get to doing long-term planning, right? So this is kind of oftentimes the behavior of smaller business owners, because they're so used to being the owner operator. And when you first get into business, oftentimes you pretty much fly by the seat of your pants. You make decisions quickly and you change them quickly. And when you're only that's not that difficult. Or if you have one or two people, you can kind of keep them on track with you. But the bigger your team gets, the more of a problem that becomes, because that means you don't have accountability. That means they don't have accountability, right? So having lack of direction, refusing to plan, and the inability to come up with a long-term plan, the bigger your company is, the more that becomes a huge, huge problem. The second issue is when you feel like it is absolutely essential that you micromanage people on your team, because it means to your team, it means that as a leader, you don't trust their capabilities, which is really demotivating, and it prevents them from really using their experience at the highest level and coming up with their own initiatives, right? So kind of watch yourself and look for if you are getting into kind of a mode of being hyper focused on minor details versus helping your team to be autonomous and making their own empowering decisions. So that goes along with my first point, having really good planning practices, because those practices enable you to trust and rely on your team, because now you know that your team has a good plan that they're executing on, and it means that you can focus on what really matters, which is company strategy and growth, right? The third aspect is if you feel like you have kind of a fixed mindset. So the refusal to acknowledge limitations or consider different viewpoints means you kind of have an inflexible way of thinking. And oftentimes that means refusing feedback, right? And feedback is such an important growth element, because when you're transparent about what's going on and you're open to feedback and you're acknowledging that you don't have all the answers, that means you can also learn from mistake, and that means you're showing that you have growth-minded leadership. So kind of watch out for if you feel like you're defensive a lot or you want to blame somebody else when problems arise. That's kind of a sign that that might be in your way. So watch out for that. Number 4 is when you, that kind of goes right along with that, it's like when you ignore feedback. And, you know, a lot of times, especially if you are used to making all the decisions and if you're used to being the smartest person in the room, even when you hire better and better people, you might still have that mindset of, I'm right, I know best, I can make the best decisions. And when you dismiss others' input or you don't even ask for it, for one thing, it means you're kind of out of touch with things. And it also really means you're harming your team morale and your productivity, because you're not engaging all that talent, all that input, all that expertise that you hired and are paying for. So it's really, even when you are asking and getting input from people who are much junior to you, they can still give you really important feedback and viewpoints, because from their perspective, they're seeing something different than you are, which might still be really, really important to the process that you are evaluating. So you as a leader want to listen. You want to seek and value the perspectives of your team, really get diverse viewpoints into the room, which leads to making better decisions. And it also leads to having a team that's much more engaged, because suddenly they have a voice. So it kind of goes from them feeling like they don't even need to come up with things because you already have the answers, which makes them disengaged, to them actually showing up, thinking things through, being more strategic, and opening up some viewpoints that you may not have considered before, okay? So the 5th red flag that I want to talk about is very prevalent in many companies, big and small, which is poor communication. So, and that part of that is information hoarding, right? And this is a really tricky one, because oftentimes this comes from people who are used to being individual contributors, and that being their biggest value, to suddenly being managers and leaders, where the value actually comes from the team performance, but that's not quite the mindset shift that they have made. So they're used to feeling like, hey, what I contribute is the most important thing, which leads to information hoarding, which leads to not sharing what other people also need to know. So that creates confusion, unclarity, ineffectiveness, and also, when you think about it, lack of transparency and responsiveness breeds mistrust. So leaders absolutely must share insights, then listen actively and provide clarity on expectations. And your vehicle for that is having really effective meetings. And I know so many people really hate meetings, think meetings suck. And for most people, they do suck because they're not run effectively. They're not prepared. they don't follow a plan, so they waste a ton of time and we don't have the outcomes that we need, right? So this goes right with our bulletproof strategy, where you have to have a plan that you work from. Then you create your weekly plan from that, which is your scoreboard, and then you have your meetings to evaluate and really look at the metrics to make sure that you are on track, because when we don't measure, we can't improve, right? So number 6 in this is the inability to delegate. And if you follow me at all, you've heard me talk about delegation a ton, because there's so many different ways of doing that. And for most, it's just this basic idea of you're telling people what to do. And that alone is never enough, but that's where most business owners are stuck. And when you're not good at delegating, or you don't do it, well, let's be honest, you can't do it all. There's no way you're the best at everything. And a lot of times I see this as an attempt to save the company money. The thinking is, if I do it, then we don't have to pay somebody else to do it. But what I really want to invite you to do is think about, like, when you're doing something and your time is sucked up by something that's pretty low level that somebody else could do, what are you costing the company right now versus what are you saving the company? Because how could you be spending your time in a much more effective value producing way? Okay. So this is kind of this refusal to share responsibilities. A lot of times it kind of goes along with what we talked about before, where your focus is more on personal success versus developing others. Because when you put your time into developing others and truly take delegation to level 2 and 3, where people gain full autonomy and they fully develop to their highest capability, and they're living in their sweet spot, well, now they're providing humongous value to the company versus just kind of following the basic stuff. Hoarding information is a piece of that, because when leaders withhold information, it means you're keeping the team in the dark, and that undermines trust, and it means it's a little bit of a power move sometimes that stifles innovation and collaboration, because great leaders really have transparency where it's crucial. They share relevant information openly, and that means everybody is on the same page. It fosters that culture of trust and collaboration, and it builds high performers. So those last 2-3 points really go hand in hand. Another one is not using employee strengths. So you must identify and utilize the unique strengths and talents of every single team member that you have, because your team thrives when they can gifts and talents to the table that are recognized and utilized. So, think about this. When you're on a team and you're really putting yourself out there and you're delivering, and that is something that actually leads to great results, and that is something that is acknowledged, well, you're going to do more of it. And that's what you want, right? You want people to feel like what they bring to the table is really valuable. So great leaders have a mission to know their team members' unique strengths, and they understand how to leverage those strengths, which again builds high performance. And of course, it boosts employee engagement and it drives results. And when we're talking about each one of those things, you might think, well, that's all wonderful, but each one of these things takes time. You bet it does. I'm not going to lie and say it doesn't, and the most important thing about this is, like, yes, it'll take time on the front end, but the ROI on the back end is going to be huge for you. So as you listen to me talking about this, I really invite you to open up your mind and go, okay, if I spent a little bit of time every day, a little bit of time each week to really focus on these aspects, I would be growing a team that is autonomous, that can drive results on on their own, on its own, versus me having to lead and execute and follow up and check on every single little thing, which is what the life of most small business owners is like. So I really invite you to change your mindset around this and just take small steps towards it. Because another piece of this is when you don't foster teamwork, right? When you have a bunch of individual employees that are not truly working together, or even worse, what some owners do is they pit employees against each other because they think it will bring some great competition to light. Well, it more builds a destructive competitive environment, which leads to, high stress, turnover, burnout, like all those things you don't want. So what you want to see instead is you want to prioritize teamwork, really help people work together, even peer-to-peer delegation, where they build their own instructions with each other, where they collaborate with each other, where they understand the company and work together on company goals. So great leaders truly prioritize teamwork, and part of that is setting performance metrics like we talked about before, which encourages collaboration and collective success versus individual competition. So we always want to look at this as like, how can we drive more as a group versus the individual, because there's truly so much more value in there. So a great team means it's a workplace where everybody is valued and motivated to contribute to the team's success as a whole. Because true leadership really means that you value and you uplift and you grow your team, because now your individual effort is exponentially more. And, another piece of that is, as a leader, as a business owner, I know there's always more on your plate than you can possibly manage, which a lot of times means you're unavailable as a leader. Now, when you're an invisible leader, it means you're building a huge disconnect between what people need to know, what they do know, what they need to ask constantly. And it also means, to them, it means that you don't really care, that they don't really matter, because you're not investing the time in them. So great leaders are accessible. They engage with their teams. They have regular one-on-ones, because as a team, that means your team feels valued, both as workers and as individuals. And of course, the great benefit that you have from that is when you're supportive, when you're building them as strategic partners on your team, that means they're going to ask you a whole lot fewer questions. They're going to show up for you at a much higher level. Now they're growing and getting more important and more influential on your team. It means that you have a relationship that is deep and nurtured, which means they actually care not just about your business, but about you as a person. And they'll go the extra mile for you when it counts, which is, of course, when you need it the most. So you really want to look at this. Another red flag is when you find yourself focusing mostly on the negative. Because when your conversation with your team is always about, what's wrong, and there's very little what's right, well, you're missing the most critical component of effective leadership here. Because when you provide constant criticism, even if it's constructive, there's very little positive feedback in there. It builds a toxic environment. Because what you want to do instead is you want to build a balance between feedback and praise. And feedback could be both directions, right? A lot of times feedback is about, hey, this is what you're doing, and this is what I'd like you to do instead, or this is what I'd like you to do more of, where you're trying to change a behavior. But you always want to sandwich that with looking for what is working. And look, a lot of times I mentioned this, and it sounds like boosting somebody's ego. And this is not at all what this is about. This is about you letting people know what they're doing right, so they will do more of that. And that is a huge win for you, because now people are focused on their strengths, what they're doing well already, and then you can help them through your coaching and mentoring. You can help them get better on the other stuff. So you want to recognize and celebrate wins, because that boosts morale, it motivates people, and it enforces a positive work culture, which of course you want to have. And here's the last one. If you find yourself not acting quickly, if you find yourself sitting on your decisions, overthinking, overanalyzing, this is detrimental to progress. So, because what that feels like to your team is this lack of action builds a lack of trust, and it halts productivity. So when you are not communicating what's going on, and you're not communicating changes, you're not communicating decisions, it feels like you don't know what you're doing. So you want to make sure that you really show up as a leader, and that you think things through. You can think things through even with your team, so that they understand what the process is. And then you can make timely decisions, and you can cut through the red tape and and empower your team to do the same thing. So they can help you move through challenges when you help them unblock, when you help them take actions faster, and they can do the same for you. So this agility is absolutely crucial for your momentum, and of course, achieving goals efficiently. So these 12 elements all go together hand in hand. So a lot of times, if you've been listening to me talk and you're like, yeah, this sounds familiar, this doesn't, this is definitely where I'm stuck. Oftentimes when you have one of these show up, they influence all the others. So I really encourage you to look deep and be open to starting to make changes about this. If you want to know more about this, we have a great training out there, and I'll put the link below that'll help you think through all this in detail, and it'll give you some really good first steps for how to make some changes around this, so that you can build this autonomous, self-led team that can really help you build the company, and that's a joy to work with, and that can help you make more profits. And that's really what we want the teams to do. Anyway, I'll put the link below. Thank you so much for listening. Let us know if you have any questions, and I will see you next time.